Thank you for following the 7th module of the SurveyToGo scripting online training. In this module, we are going to discuss randomization techniques. Randomization is a common request in questionnaires, and you would often see logical instruction that would ask you, for example, to display a certain brands list in a random order. Or another typical example is a question or a set of questions that ask at what level you agree with a list of sentences and ask to show those sentences in a random display order. Depending on the structure of the specific questionnaire, you may need different randomization techniques that can be done on question answers, on question topics, on a sequence of questions within a subchapter, or with regards to the order of iterations of a chapter that is iterating on a scale. Randomizations can be configured either by configuration, selecting certain available option in the SurveyToGo designer, which is the easier method, or can be done by scripting. The specific logical requirements will determine what will be used for a specific script. Normally, with complex randomization requirements, we will need to implement those by script. As we've done on previous models, we will demonstrate it by looking at a small sample survey. So let's look at the questionnaire and script that was created to implement it. So let's first review the questionnaire that we have to implement. So the first question is, what do you use to get to work daily? And the answers are public transportation, personal car, or other. And we're asked to display that question only to 10% of the response. So 10% of the cases in a random manner. The next question is an awareness question, A1, which is the following brands that you're familiar with. You can see there's a brands list with a none as the last option. And we're asked to randomize those answers and keep the none as the last answer in the list. We have an additional requirement, which is to cancel the interview if none is selected. The next question is A2. What do you recall about? And there's a placeholder for a brand, and the requirement is randomly select one of the mentioned brands in A1. So if we mention that we know Mazda, Ford, and BMW in A1, then we should randomly select one of those and display it in A2. Then we have a repeating section of questions A3 and A4, and the questionnaire asks us repeat A3 and A4 for each of the brands that were mentioned in the A1 question, the brands that you're familiar with. And the requirement is, and this is very important for our example, is to keep the same order of brands as was used in A1. If you remember, in A1, we're asked to randomize the appearance of the answers in each interview. So in the repeating part of A3 and A4, we would need to ask those questions for the brands in the same order as the display order that was used in A1. A3 is, does your family own a, and then the brand name in this specific brand that we're in the context of. And then the A4 would ask how many of that brand does your family own, and iterate those set of questions for all the brands that were mentioned in A1. Of course, there's an implicit requirement here to not show A4. If in A3 we mentioned that we're not, that our family doesn't have a car of that specific brand. The last question is A5. In A5, we're asked for each of the following sentences, mention which of the brands matches the sentence. And there's a set of sentences. The sentences are: is good value for money, is affordable, is reliable, etc. And we need to show in that question only the brands that were mentioned in question A1, so only the brands that we're aware of. We can select multiple brands per sentence, of course, because we can say that both Mazda and Toyota are affordable. We need to randomize both the sentences and the brands and keep the same order of the brands as we did in A1. And we should also display a none option for each of the sentences and keep it as the last option in the answers list. So let's review how we're implementing this in the script. I'll now switch to the studio, and we'll see how we implemented it. So as you can see, I've already created the structure as I've made in the previous sessions. I already entered the question text and the answers, and several additional things that I'll show you while we review the questions one by one. So let's start with the first question, N1. N1 was, what do you use to get to work daily? And the answers were public transportation, personal car, and other. If you remember, we were asked to display that question only to 10% of the respondents. So the easiest way to implement it is by adding an entrance rule that would take care of it. In the entrance rule, we're going to use a function that is called random. It's a built-in function in SurveyToGo, and that function is a function that returns in a random manner one value in the range of 0 to the number mentioned in the random function, in this case 10, minus 1. So in this case, basically the random function would return in a random manner. Each interview it's going to return a different value between 0 and 9. So in one interview it can be 0, in one interview it can be 9, in one interview it's going to be 5. And the nature of the function is so that it would do that randomly. So on a large enough sample, those numbers are going to be distributed more or less evenly. So to make sure that roughly 10% of the interviews are this question is being displayed, we can simply ask if the random function returned one of the static values between 0 and 9. In this case, I used 0, but I could have used 1 or 2 or 5. It doesn't matter as long as it is one value out of 10, and this would take care of the fact that this question is going to be asked roughly 10% of the times. Let's look now at A1, which is a key question in our questionnaire. Because it would then a lot would be determined in what we're going to do in that question. So A1 is the awareness question, and we're asked which of the brands we're familiar with, and the available answers are car brands with the none at the end. And I've already created a answer scale for that specific question, and you can see that I've marked none as an exclusive answer, and we've seen how we do that in previous sessions. Now the requirement was to display the answers in that question in a random order. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there are two ways to display or to control the randomization in SurveyToGo. The first one is configuration based. So in each question, if we go to the advanced tab of that question, we can see that there's a randomization section at the bottom. And if we would have simply marked the randomized answers in that question, then the answers would then display in a random order in each interview. We can say that we want a cyclic random order or a complete random order. In this case, it would not meet our needs, and the reason is that we need to use the same order, the same random order that we're going to be using in A1. We then need it in later parts of the questionnaire. The first one is the iterated chapter of A1 and A3, and the last one is A5, where we ask several sentences on the brands that we're aware of, and we're asked to display the brands in the same order as they were displayed in A1. So in this case, we would need to do that by script, which is the other option to control various random settings, like the display order of answers in this case. So where do we control how a certain question is displayed, and in this case how it is displaying the answers? If you remember from previous sessions, we do that from the start script. So let's look at the start script of the question. So in this question, we would need to do a few things. The first one is to create some random order. That order is going to be used to display the answers in this question, but we also need to keep that order somewhere so we can later utilize it. How do we, where do we keep things that we need to utilize later in a script, or we want them then to appear in the data? We do that by dummy questions. So let's see how we're implementing it in A1. So the first thing, as I mentioned, we need to create some random order that we're going to be using. So for this, we're using the create random array function, which is a built-in function in SurveyToGo. That function receives a size of an array and then returns a random order of numbers between 1 and that size. So if we create random array with the number 4, then we're going to receive a random array of the numbers 1 to 4. So it can be 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, and so on. So the first thing that we're going to do is we create a random array and provide it with the number of answers that we have in our question, and we keep it in a variable. We call it brands order. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to keep that array in a certain place, dummy question, as I mentioned, and I've created in this script a dummy question called A1 ord that's going to keep the randomized order for me so I can utilize it later. So I use the function set answer to A1 ord, and I place there the array transformed into a string. I cannot hold an array of numbers in any of the questions that are part of SurveyToGo, but I have an open-ended. So we have a function that is called int array to string. So that would basically take my array and convert it into a string that I can then store in my A1 ord dummy open-ended question. The last thing that we are left to do is utilize that order in order to randomize the answers of our question. We didn't do that yet. We only created the random order and stored it somewhere, but the last thing that we need to do is to randomize the answers, and for that we have a very intuitive function name called randomizations that you then use in order to randomize the answers of a specific question. In this case, we're giving it an array that we would want it to utilize to display the answers. It's a random array because we use the create random array function to generate that array. So let's see how it behaves. I'll launch the emulator. And as you can see, the brands are displayed in a random order. One thing that you can see is the none maintained its last position, which was one of the requirements. So let's see where this was configured. I'm going to close the emulator, and I'm going to go back to the question definition. And this was done in the answer scales, the answer scale of the car brands. So if I go to the non-answer in the scale, you'll see that I checked an attribute that is called do not random. So this attribute makes sure that the answer is always going to be displayed in the place where it should be, where it was originally defined. So in that case, none is the last answer. So no matter what randomization we're going to be implementing on those answers, it is always going to be displayed as the last one. So I'm going to be closing the answer scale. The next thing that we were requested to do is cancel the interview if none was selected. This is a multiple selection question, so we're going to add the jump rule for that action, and we're going to add the rule with the contains function and check that if the last answer was selected, was mentioned, then we would want to cancel the interview, and I selected the cancel action in the action place. So that would take care of the canceling of the interview if none was selected. Now let's look at A2. If you remember, A2 was a question that we were asked to display for one of the brands that were mentioned in A1. Now we should somewhere place the logic that would randomly select one of the brands that were mentioned in A1. So in this case, I decided to place it on the end script of A1, where the answers are already known, and what we are doing as well is we're gonna store that brand that we're gonna randomly select into a dummy question again. As I mentioned, every time that I select something randomly, I would want to place it in a dummy question, so that anyone that is reviewing the data later would be able to know what was the random selection in that specific interview. Because, for example, we could have simply select the brand and only pipe it in A2, but then the person looking at the data would not know what was the actual brand that was selected, because text piping is only for display and is not something that is kept as part of the interview data. So every time you randomly select or do anything in your script, always as a best practice, create a dummy question and store that random result in it. So in this case, I created a dummy question called A1 cell. It's a single choice question, and that question holds the brands list, the same car brands list. And I would randomly select a brand out of the selected brands and store it in that question. So then I could not only utilize it to pipe the brand into the A2 question, but also it would be available to anyone reviewing the data. So how do we do that? So to get the answers of what was mentioned in A1, I use the function getAnswers, of course, as we've seen in previous sessions. But in this case, I also give it another parameter, which is a second parameter, which is true. That function, the getAnswer, is called in that manner with the second parameter, which is true, basically indicates the getAnswers to return the array of the mentioned answers of the question in a random order. So let's say that I mentioned that I know Mazda and Ford and BMW, which are indexes 1, 4, and 5, and the getAnswers would return the 1, 4, and 5 in a random order, in a mixed order. It can be 5, 1, and 4, 4, 5, and 1. That would be randomly determined in each interview. So this is basically doing most of the work for me, because I have the list of answers already in a random order, so I can simply pick the first one in that random array and use that one for my selection. So this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to set A1 cell, the dummy question that I created for that randomly selected brand. I'm going to set it with the first item of my ans array, which is the random array that the getAnswers returned. I remind again that arrays indexes start with 0. So the first item of an array is going to be the item in the 0 place. The second is going to be in the 1 place. The third item is going to be in the 2 place, etc. So the only thing that I'm left with in A2 is simply pipe the brand name into the question text. I've already created a placeholder for the brand name, and I'm going to use the setTextFormat function as we've seen in the text piping sessions, and I'm using the selected answer text of the dummy question that I created, where I mark the randomly selected brand in the car brand's answer scale. So let's see how this is running. I'm going to start the emulator. You can see that in this interview the N1 question is displayed, so I'll select one of the options. Now let's mention some of the brands that we're aware of, and as you can see they are in a random order. So let's select Ford, Kia and Renault, and if you remember, the end script of A1 is going to randomly select one of those and utilize it for A2 after placing it in A1 cell. And as you can see, randomly Ford was selected. So this is exactly what we expected. So let's continue with the other parts of the questionnaire. Now, if you remember, we had a set of 2 questions, repeating questions, A3 and A4. Those 2 questions should be asked for all the brands that were mentioned in A1 as aware, and should be asked in the order that they were that was used to display them in A1. So the first thing, let's define the loop chapter for those 2 questions. We're gonna basically place those 2 questions in a chapter, and we're gonna define that chapter to iterate on the car brands, because we're gonna ask those questions on each of the car brands that were mentioned in A1. And we also say that we're gonna enter only the iterations that corresponds to the brand that were mentioned in A1. So we use an iteration entrance rule, as we've seen in the previous scripting training model of iterations, and we use the function contains to implement that. Because A1 is a multiple selection question, so we're only going to iterate on those brands that were mentioned in A1. Now, assuming that we didn't have to control the order of the iterations appearance with a specific order, but we only had to have them random, then we could have basically set that configuration item randomize iterations, and that would display the iterations in any random order that SurveyToGo would select for us in that specific interview. However, we were asked to display to ask those questions A3 and A4 in the same order as they were displayed in A1. So for that reason, we have a specific mechanism in SurveyToGo that allows us to control the iterations order in a specific loop chapter. This is done by placing a predefined built-in function of SurveyToGo. That function is called onCreateIterationOrder. You can see it is colored by green, which means it's a built-in SurveyToGo function. And it works in a way that it's a callback function. So SurveyToGo, basically every time that it reaches a chapter that has iterations defined on it, it would look for that function in your advanced scripts, and if it would find one, then it would apply what's in the function instead of just applying the default order. So in this case, what we've been doing is we've basically said that if you're now encountering, if you reach chapter index 1, then instead of using your default iteration order, use the order that we stored in A1 ord. And you can see that now we use the opposite function to take the string representation of the array that we've placed in the A1 OR dummy question when we were working on A1. And now we're using the opposite function, the string to int array. So we take that string and we transform it back to an array because that's what the iteration order mechanism of SurveyToGo expects. So it basically says if you're in chapter 1, use that order, otherwise use the default iteration order that you were going to use anyway. This is how it is implemented in SurveyToGo. This is how you control the order of iterations. And you can read more about it in our support portal at support.dooblo.net. And if you search for control the iteration order, then you would find the guide that details it further. So let's see now how we're further adding the logic to A3 and A4 after we've controlled the iteration, which iterations we enter and what is the order of their execution. We still have to adjust A3 and A4. So first, A3 displays the correct brand name, which is held, as we've seen in the previous scripting session, for iterations in the iteration name, because the iteration is on the car brands scale. The same thing we do for A4. We replace the placeholder with the iteration name. And another thing that, if you remember in our questionnaire, there was an implicit rule that basically we're not going to ask A4 if we mentioned that our family doesn't own a certain brand of cars. We're only going to ask how many cars of a specific brand do our family own if we mention in A3 that we own that car. So we've added an entrance rule to A4, which is to enter it only if in A3 we said yes, which is the first answer. So let's see now how the script is running. So as you can see, I started the emulator. The N1 question, in this case, it was not displayed. And let's say that we are familiar with Ford, Kia, and BMW. You remember that here we're displaying the brands in a random order. So Ford, Kia, and BMW. In A2, we're asked on one of the questions, so maybe let's say that this is Ford, and I would say that Ford is a fast car. Then we're going to be asked about the various brands, A3 and A4. Now we're at the iteration chapter. And do we own a Ford? My family doesn't own a Ford. It owns a Kia, and we have one car manufactured by Kia, and then we do not have any BMW. So as you've seen, the order of the brands in the iterations was exactly as the one that we saw in A1. Let's continue to the last question of the questionnaire. The last question of the questionnaire was asking about the match of the brands to specific sentences. We're building the question as a multiple selection grid, where the sentences are the topics and the answers are our car brands. And if you remember, we were asked to first randomize the topics, those sentences, then randomize or display the brands in the order that they were mentioned in A1, as well as add a none option to each of the sentences. So let's see how this is implemented. Again, we're gonna go and do that in the start script. So the first thing that we do is we show only the brands that were mentioned in A1. So we use the function filter answers by answers, you must be familiar with that function by now. We use that in the filtering scripting session. The second thing that we need to do is display the none, because the none is obviously not one of the brands that were mentioned because of the cancellation rule that we've made in question A1. So we need to add it in this question. So we use the function set answer visible. And again, this was discussed in our filtering session. The next thing that we're doing is we are randomizing the sentences. The sentences are the topics, so we use the randomize topics function. And in this case, you can see that I'm not giving it any or a specific order to utilize for the display. Simply use a random display order that SurveyToGo would select. So I'm simply using the randomize topics function. And the last thing that I need to do is I need to make sure that my brands are displayed in the same order as I did in A1. And again, I'm using the randomize answers function, the same as I did in A1, with a specific array. In this case, I'm taking the answer of the A1 ORD, the dummy open-ended that holds the string representation of the array. I'm using the string to int array to turn it back into an array representation so that the randomized answers can utilize it. And this last sentence basically makes sure that my car brands are displayed in the same order as in A1. So let's now see how this is behaving. So N1 was not displayed in this case, but now we're in A1 and we're going to select Fiat and Kia and then BMW. One of them is going to be displayed in A2, and I'm going to say that Fiat is a comfortable car. Now we're going to be asked the A3 and A4 in the same order. So does your family own a Fiat? No. Kia? Yes. And we own one Kia. And we do not own a BMW. And you can see, now we're in A5, you can see that I'm only displaying the brands that were mentioned in A1 in the order that they were mentioned, Fiat, Kia, and BMW. And as you can see, the sentences are displayed in a random order, as well as we've added the none option. So that basically concludes our example and our session. We've seen how randomization can be done for answers, topics, questions, or iterations. We've seen some of the options. We've seen that a randomization can be done by configuration settings that are available for questions and for chapters and iterations. And we've seen how when more complex randomizations are required, and then we are using script built code to handle those randomizations for us, touching some of the more common functions that are available in SurveyToGo to assist you with controlling those randomizations. So thank you for following this session. As with every session, the sample script and questionnaire are going to be part of the materials that are going to be associated to the session recording. And we're looking forward to seeing you on our next scripting session. Thank you.